Good afternoon, boa tarde, buenas tardes. Welcome to this webinar titled The Right to Your Duties, Interpersonal Responsibilities in Riverside, Amazonia. My name is Bruno Carvalho. I'm a professor of Romance Languages and Literatures and African American Studies here at Harvard University, where I also co-direct the Harvard Mellon Urban Initiative. This is an event of the Brazil Studies program of the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. It's co-sponsored by the Harvard University Center for the Environment. And I want to thank everyone involved with the organization, especially Gabby Patterson and Chad Genovese. Several of us here at Harvard have, over the past several years, been trying to place the Amazon at the center of discussions. Speaking for myself as a non-specialist who has only begun to study the region in recent years, I can say that I have learned a tremendous amount in different ways from each of today's speakers, and I am sure that you will all too. I will introduce them very, very briefly. You can, of course, learn more about them online. First, we'll hear from Vinicius Furuye. Vinicius is a recent PhD in sociocultural anthropology from Princeton University and is now an environmental fellow here at Harvard's Center for the Environment. We'll then have two discussants, Nathalie Interstel, who is an alumni of the Harvard Kennedy School, an expert in environmental policy, and director of the Talanoa think tank. Next, we'll hear from Mauro Almeida, a professor of anthropology at the State University of Campinas, and among many other publications, co-author with Manuela Carneiro da Cunha of the Enciclopédia da Floresta, the Encyclopedia of the Forest on the region of the Juruá River. And a renowned reference on the Amazon and on the very issues that Vinicius' talk will soon raise. So welcome, Mauro and Nathalie. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be recording today's webinar. It will be available on the Dr. Class YouTube channel shortly after today's session. The chat function will be disabled, but if you have questions for our speakers, please feel free to send it through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring that throughout the talks, and we'll address your questions after we hear from the three speakers, but feel free to submit them anytime. Without further ado, Vinicius.
Thank you, Bruno. And thank you everyone from the organization at the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, and to the commentators who kindly agreed to discuss my presentation today. I'm gonna jump right into my presentation and share my screen. Let's try over here. So, okay, so as Bruno mentioned, this presentation is entitled The Right to Your Duties, Interpersonal Responsibilities in Riverside, Amazonia. So when I first arrived to the riverbanks of the Iriri and Riozinho do Anfrísio in the state of Pará, Brazil, I was invited to participate in a young adult education project. An NGO that has been involved in community projects in this part of Amazonia for over a decade took notice of a demand for formal education and organized a series of workshops to teach history and map-making skills to the youth in riverside communities. I attended as a guest and met a group of young men and women who had come of age too late to benefit from any of the recently built schools, but were nevertheless eager to learn. Over the course of 2 weeks, I got to know these 4 young men who wanted to research and collect oral accounts of river trade in the region. For the year that followed, I tutored these 4 student researchers as they planned, recorded, and transcribed interviews with the Antigos, elder residents, as well as analyzed and presented the results. So this is a map of the region that I'm talking about. You can see the Iriri and the Anfrísio rivers right there in the middle. And while doing this work, it was enthralling to listen to elders talking about history with the interviewers who were two generations younger. The interviewees were mostly in their 60s and 70s, and their childhood memories were from a time in which life in the Amazonian riverbanks orbited around the rubber economy. They remembered the so-called rubber barons who controlled the river valley through a monopoly of trade. The interviewers, however, were born after the rubber barons left the region in the 1980s, driven away by falling rubber prices. So to these interviewers, river trade was done by the regatão, the name through which, by which river traders are known in the region. These were the river traders who broke the barons' monopoly and assumed the task of supplying riverside communities, offering credit and buying commodities collected from the forest and rivers. So before I did this fieldwork and participated in the interviews, I understood this transformation of Amazonian river trade as a break of historical proportions. The monopoly of yesteryears was upheld by several elements of debt peonage. Indebted rubber tappers were forced to trade with powerful figures who controlled prices, as well as the flow of goods and people, often falling further in debt. After river traders broke this monopoly, trading began to resemble so-called market conditions. Most river dwellers can now choose their trading partners among the handful of regatões who operate in the region. These traders, unlike the rubber barons from before, do not have at their disposal instruments for violent coercion. My initial interpretation of this history was that the opening of trade freed the riverside dwellers to plan their economic lives and liberated them from a form of political authoritarianism. My point of reference was, of course, a liberal perspective on history. The view that breaking trade monopolies in Japan or peonage relations in Russia in the 19th century, to name two examples, provided a path to freedom for these societies. Despite my better ethnographic judgment, a part of me expected that my interlocutors would tell their stories as an arch that landed in this elusive value that we call freedom. However, as I listened to the interviews conducted under mango trees, by fires at night, or on the bow of fishing boats, I realized that neither the youth nor the elders ever brought up the concept of freedom, liberdade in Portuguese, at least not with the teleological implications described above. In the rare occasion that the word did arise, it was used in a very concrete way, meaning the freedom to choose who to do business with, rather than something that evoked liberation and a transformation of historical significance. Rather than the revolution that my bourgeois ears expected, most elders told us that the relation between rubber barons and rubber tappers involved into the present relations of regatões and riverside dwellers. Gaining freedom did not mean only breaking relations, although that was also a part of it. But it also meant preserving a continuity of certain customs and relations, small bonds, and tiny solidarities that Lévi-Strauss argued are also capable of countering political abuse. So I am exaggerating the emphasis on continuity for the sake of this argument. Many elders spoke of the past as a significantly different time. Seu Gilberto, for example, an elder Riverside resident who had recently turned 74, told Jimmy, who was only 20 years old, that the oppression he endured as a young man was of a kind that doesn't exist anymore. It was worse than humiliation, he said. It was carrancismo. He told us, using a word difficult to translate, in rough terms, carrancismo is used to reference the authoritarianism of past times, when rubber barons arbitrarily imposed rules on riverside dwellers. Seu Gilberto complained particularly about a rubber baron named Frizan, who controlled the river. In his words, it was Frizan who called the shots in the Riozinho. Out in the Iriri, he didn't bother, but in here, he said everything belonged to him. The plants, the monkeys, the fish, the people. He thumped his chest and said, "This is all mine." The way Cahencismo is used in this course, always referencing a bygone era, already implies a break from the past. The difference between associating the past to Cahencismo and how I had been looking at it by using this notion of despotism is that the first, Cahencismo, passes a moral judgment on how rubber barons treated rubber tappers, whereas the second, despotism, implies a political condition somewhat exterior to rubber tappers and rubber barons. To put it another way, Cahencismo posits that in the past, exchange relations were asymmetric because of the greed of rubber barons. This imbalance has been partially corrected over time, but the way that it is enacted through acts of humiliation or disregard for another person's needs is still a possibility lurking in the background, contingent on a river trader disrespecting the dignity of a riverside dweller. While the transition from despotism to freedom is often thought as a liberation moving forward through history with a capital H, Cahencismo evokes something closer to the notion of agonistic democracy, in which the struggle for justice in political matters is a continuous fight. In the way that I came to see it, this opposition of freedom and despotism is an abstraction that can be appropriated for almost any political goal, whereas Cahencismo is felt on the skin. It is the lack of empathy of powerful men and women who do not consider the impact their decisions have on the lives of the Riverside people, a problem that never really went away. The most evident proof is the recent construction of the Belo Monte Dam downstream in the Xingu, a project that upended thousands of indigenous and Ribeirinho lives while benefiting only construction companies in São Paulo and politicians in Brasilia. In this talk, I will offer a few lines of thought that opened when I learned to let go of a framework limited by the duality of freedom, despotism, and listen to my interlocutors in the riverbanks of the Brazilian Amazon as they reflected on oppression, respect, and responsibility. These thoughts draw from a line of Brazilian anthropology that has judiciously investigated economic life in Riverside Amazonia, as well as other so-called peasant societies in Brazil. Some of these authors who are here today. These authors, they share a conviction that the tools of political economy are insufficient to analyze economic life in rural Brazil. To understand how value and power are created and circulated in these groups, it is necessary to adopt a broader perspective that includes the realm of politics, affects, nature, and supernatural beings that participate in reciprocal exchange. So, furthering this line of work, I depart from the realization that ideas such as freedom are inadequate for a robust account of historical developments and exchange relations in the riverbanks of Amazonia. For a better understanding of these relations, we must pay attention to how they are described in the local vocabulary. In particular, I analyze the categories of rights and duties, a conceptual position that we use prolifically to define our political selves in parallel to this opposition that I have been talking about between freedom and despotism. In the riverbanks of Amazonia, however, rights and duties are commonly expressed through one word, direito. To understand what a direito means, I will return to reciprocity not only as a system of exchange, but as a driver of political action. So another point that I want to make in this presentation is that it has recently become clear that the future of Amazonia is central to the survival of humankind on a planetary scale. This realization has brought together the interests of urban dwellers and peoples of the forest in an alliance that has, on occasion, bolstered the agenda of environmental protection and human rights in the Amazon. So in the Middle Xingu Basin, the struggle of the riverside residents that I'm talking about here and who are fighting against land grabbers, the same land grabbers who assassinated figures, famous figures like Chico Mendes, Dorothy Stung, Zé Cláudio and Maria, many others. So this alliance between urban dwellers and riverside residents has been successful in temporarily curbing deforestation and securing land tenure in this region. However, the rise to power of right-wing militias has changed the political tide against these hard-won victories. But it still seems that international political pressure continues to play a limited but important role in countering attacks against the forest and the people who live there. And I really hope this alliance can continue and benefit from an enhanced mutual understanding of the concepts and values that bring them together. From my fieldwork experience in the Brazilian Amazon, I learned that riverside dwellers are experts at adapting to conceptual and political innovations from the outside, a work that they refer to as amansar. I hope that the other side, that I presume consists most of the audience here today, can reciprocate in its willingness to listen and learn. And in that spirit, I will continue by offering another ethnographic scene. So part 2. At sundown, our boat docked for the night at the mouth of the Iriri River, a major tributary of the Xingu, which by its turn flows north into the Amazon River. We had left the town of Altamira a couple of days earlier and navigated south on the Leopardo II, a battered wooden vessel that had seen more glorious days, but was still comfortable and reliable. As soon as we stopped, the pilot, Paulo, yelled back at us, "Get some rest. Tomorrow we climb the Desvio." The Desvio, literally the detour, is one of the 2 arms of the Iriri that flow into the Xingu. It had stopped raining about a month earlier, and the water level was receding so fast that the other arm, tellingly named the Cachoeira Grande, was already too dangerous to navigate. But there is still enough water to climb the Desvio, Paulo assured me. To overcome the Desvio, the pilot must zigzag between rapids and rocks for what feels like 3 or 4 hours. Because our boat was packed to capacity with supplies, we had to do the trip twice. In the morning, we would take half of the cargo upstream, leave it somewhere safe, and come back in the afternoon to fetch the rest. Paulo knew there would be a lot of loading and unloading, and everyone needed to be rested. Later in the evening, Zezé, the regatão who owned the boat, told me, "Well, it's good that you came. You got another pair of hands to help." We had hunger hammocks under the thatched roof held by wooden stacks, a shelter built for the travelers who pass through this intersection. "Usually I carry plenty of passengers," Zezé continued, "but this time only a handful needed a ride. I like it when there are lots of people. I make sure everyone is well fed and happy. I just don't like it when they play loud music. I prefer it when it's quiet like this." Our troop consisted of the pilot Paulo, his wife, a 17-year-old boy from the upper Iriri, a woman who was 7 months pregnant, and me. We were an odd bunch and definitely not the help Paulo had hoped for, but we were doing our best to keep the boat afloat. Reclining in his hammock, Zezé continued, "I don't charge passengers for trips on my boat. It's not right. Back in the days of the gold rush, I charged gold miners 5 grams of gold per trip because they were too many and too unskilled. They were afraid of water and didn't help on deck. The crew around us was already fast asleep. Zezé spoke to me in a lazy tone that betrayed he would soon join them. But you guys are different. We would be in trouble if you didn't help us load and unload the boat. That's why we don't charge passengers. I think the custom comes from the days when all passengers had the right, tinha direito, to row the boat. All the healthy men, anyway. The rowing was their pay." So many inhabitants of the riverbanks of the Iriri use the word direito, which in standard Portuguese means right, to express what I usually associated with the idea of duty, which we would call dever. Zezé was using the concept in that way. He was telling me that before trading boats were equipped with combustion engines, all passengers were required to help row it. It was their duty as well as their right. After I finished fieldwork, I mentioned this linguistic slippage to colleagues from the US who always expressed surprise. One of them commented that such ambiguity would not make sense in English because, quote, we like to keep those two concepts clearly distinct here. Her point was that the difference is central in the legal foundation of modern democracy. And I'm not a scholar of the history of the United States, but I can see how the Bill of Rights would mean something different if it had been named the Bill of Duties. So these amendments to the US Constitution protect freedom of speech and religion, as well as the right to bear arms and to a fair trial. They exemplify what freedom and rights came to mean in the tradition of Western democracies. That is, the opposite of obligations and duties. Historically, they were conceived as freedom from certain obligations and duties required by absolutist states, but this particular definition became so widespread that it has evolved into a general meaning that stands on itself despite the absence of any monarchs in this side of the Atlantic. There are, however, a number of everyday situations in which the opposition of rights and duties is not so clear cut. So in children have a right to education, but it's also compulsory for them to attend school. And even Locke and Rousseau, intellectuals who inspired the revolutions of the 18th century, they describe the right to revolution as a duty to revolt against tyrants. So when we think about relations rather than individuals, rights and duties begin to blend into one another. This transactive nature of rights is evident in the way Amazonians use the word direito. Once a man told me that it was the right of an adult to take care of his or her parents once they reached old age. Another time, a fisherman proclaimed that it was the river trader's right to pay him on the date they had agreed upon. One person's right is another person's duty, and this slippage indicates that rather than individual stakes, we're talking about the relations here. So the point is not to argue that a linguistic detail determines the conceptual universe of Riverside Amazonia, but the language matters insofar that it requires us to think outside of what we normally assume to be rights or freedom. It points to a broader logic in which reciprocity and accountability are as important as individual interests. Marcel Mauss, writing about exchange, noted that in several languages, including ancient Chinese and Proto-German, the act of buying and selling are expressed by the same word. And in many other languages, this differentiation is very recent. His point was that the breaking down of reciprocal flows into individual acts is a relatively recent trend, so much so that new words had to be invented. This artifice facilitated some forms of exchange, notably the rise of commodity exchange as the paramount form of economic circulation, but precluded forms of interpersonal commitments that are conceptually removed from contractual transactions. So I'm not implying that riverside dwellers of Amazonia cannot differentiate the interests of individual actors. The river traders and riverside residents that I befriended during my fieldwork are perfectly capable of pivoting between asserting their individual interests in one occasion or deferring to collective norms according to the situation, like any person that lives in a society. What I am suggesting is that the word direito, that when it's translated as rights, conveys an image of inalienable and fundamental rights, is best understood in Riverside Amazonia as a position within a field of interpersonal responsibilities. This means that policies that aim to support the local economy and buffer the riverside communities from environmentally destructive activities might do best if they do not presuppose that the riverbanks are inhabited by liberal individual subjects, a not so original admonition that is worthwhile repeating, since the lesson does not seem to have broken through this tendency of universalizing market ethics. So I'll offer an example of what that means in practice and then point to initiatives of the Riverside people that offer an alternative vision for a shared future to conclude the talk. Part 3. Over the past decade, the Xingu Basin has been devastated, as I'm sure everyone here in this presentation knows, by the construction of the Belo Monte Dam in the outskirts of the town of Altamira. This $18 billion project created the world's third largest hydroelectric dam and wreaked havoc in the region, displacing riverside dwellers, diverting water away from indigenous peoples, and transforming Altamira from a sleepy riverside town into the city with the highest murder rate in Brazil. Indigenous groups and environmentalists fought hard against the project, but despite their efforts, the federal government backed the dam and construction began in 2011. To assuage the numerous voices warning the dam would destroy the livelihoods of thousands of people, the electricity company was required to invest millions of dollars, presumably to offset environmental and social damage. Predictably, the money that was supposed to compensate and support those affected by the dam ended up creating its own problems. One afternoon, in the cabin of his trading boat, Joel, a 21-year-old river trader from the EDD, complained about how aid was distributed along the river. He told me that the company who owned the dam was building a new school in the indigenous villages located across the river from where he lived. The electricity company also provided the indigenous residents of the river with fuel and technical assistance for fishing and agriculture. In contrast, Joel's family didn't receive any support because they are not considered indigenous. Joel and his neighbors call themselves beiradeiros and descend mostly from rubber tappers, even though they are proudly connected to their indigenous neighbors by kinship and trade. Joel said to me, "Their village is on the other side of the river. How can the company claim they were affected by the dam and we were not? Can you explain why they get benefits and we don't?" Well, I asked Joel to first tell me what he thought. He said, "I think it's because we don't have a strong boss, a patrão. The NGO didn't demand we receive compensation. The indigenous people got their rights, recebeu seu direito, because their boss, FUNAI, which is the government agency for indigenous people, is strong," he theorized. In Joel's view, FUNAI conveyed the interest of the indigenous people to the dam owner and obtained their rights. Beiradeiro families like his own did not get any rights because the entity that he considered their boss, the same NGO that organized the workshops that I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, did not petition the dam owner effectively. Rights failed to circulate and Joel blamed it on the new boss. The economy of rights that Joel described to me follows the same path of credit and supplies as they enter the valley. So rights come through mediators with connections in the city who deliver them to riverside dwellers. This mediation produces an outside and an inside, and control over this mediation creates power. River bosses provide political and economic goods while the riverside dwellers reciprocate with commodities and political allegiance. When circulation is successful, the duty of the boss is realized in the right of the riverside resident, and trust is reproduced. Joel explained to me that this circuit failed because his rights were contingent on the new boss performing its duty. Unfortunately, the NGO had blundered its job. From the perspective of Joel. So I was taken a bit by surprise by this view, but he insisted that I offer my own account for what was going on. And I had to explain something. And I blamed the lack of economic compensation for Beiradeiro families on the political invisibility of the Riverside people. I argue that the notion of indigenous rights is more established in decision-making circles in Brasilia, whereas few have heard of the plight of the Beiradeiros, which is why stories like that of Joel's family should be told to wider audiences. Thinking back, perhaps I wanted to overstate the political relevance of ethnographic writing, even if, in all probability, those decision makers are not avid readers of anthropology. The political model in my head has logical gaps and a fair amount of wishful thinking, but my answer followed reasonings and connections that shape how I see political representation and power. My model of how power works maps onto what I spend most of my days doing, just as Joel's definition of political agency as a kind of mediation reflects his work as a regatão. I don't think that either of our interpretations are wrong or completely right. Um, it's hard to say if compensations were not awarded to Riverside dwellers because of lack of political lobbying or due to the correlation of forces and cultural hegemony. Most probably it happened because poor people like the Biradeiros do not have agency in either of these models of power. But the point that I want to make is that our theories pointed to different ontologies of rights. In my interpretation, the riverside dwellers already had a right to compensation, but they needed to realize it through an improved legal, cultural, and political channel. In Joel's formulation, it was the mediation itself that created the right, as well as the duty to reciprocate. So, to illustrate it another way, in my mind, there are many rights that exist because they are guaranteed by the Brazilian Constitution, but are not respected in the real world. Whereas it seems to me that for Joel, rights exist only insofar as they reach their intended benefactors. As Joel explained it to me, we don't have any rights, so we need a strong boss to go get them for us. The robber barons who subjugated and humiliated riverside dwellers under Carrancismo had a privileged connection to the outside world, mediating all credit and production that came in and out of the valley. It took half a century for the inhabitants of the Iriri to recalibrate that balance in their relationship with the new mediators, the regatões. Recent changes are disrupting this balance by adding new actors to this mixture. But despite the overwhelming forces against them, the riverside dwellers are demanding to participate in this new economy of rights on their own terms. I will finish by pointing to an initiative that demonstrates the Beradeiros' determination to maintain dignity and stave away the return of humiliation. So the Conselho Ribeirinho is a political group that represents the interests of riverside dwellers displaced by the creation of the Belo Monte artificial lake. Ever since the lake was created in 2015, the dam owner has attempted to unilaterally decide how and where to resettle the evicted families and continues to evade its legal responsibilities. The Conselho Ribeirinho came into being to represent these families and be a decision maker and mediator of the process of reoccupying the Xingu River. Their mission is to defend the Ribeirinho way of life and ensure that the electricity company respects the economic, social, and cultural characteristics of the riverside people. Organized autonomously, the group is reinventing the economy of rights on the riverbanks of the Xingu, incorporating mediation within its own structure. The Conselho Ribeirinho is an experiment in direct democracy, incipient and fragile, just as any political experiment that challenges the interests of the state and capital. So I had the pleasure to meet several members of the Conselho shortly after it was formed. I met, for example, Seu Arano, an elder member who still has enough energy to put up quite a fight. He told me that his outrage came from knowing that his rights were being taken from them and given to the rich. It was then his duty to go fight to get his rights back for him and his neighbors. As I referenced earlier, the riverside dwellers are skillful in adapting to new political environments, a capacity expressed in the notion of amansar, another term of difficult translation, which means roughly to tame. One of the many meanings of this action can be summarized as the production of new relations with new humans and non-human actors. after the excesses of the times of Carrancismo, new relations reconnected people in disparate positions of power under a transactive notion of rights. However, the Belo Monte Dam expropriated thousands of people from their land and exploited the labor of thousands more to enrich the owners of a few construction companies. The compensation that was envisioned to offset this damage arrived in terms conceived by the electricity company, and those that were affected had no voice in it. The owner of the dam did little to recognize the dignity of the riverside dwellers, and the Ribeirinhos attempted to build new relations to amansar this dam, but were met by a wall of corporative culture. Evictions and the destruction of their way of life has been so humiliating that the Ribeirinhos, it has become obvious that reciprocity isn't possible in this relation. The powerful men and women behind Belo Monte cannot conceive of a reciprocal relation with the riverside dwellers, and negotiations frequently stall. Many of the Ribeirinhos of the Xingu Basin are concluding that the only right that is left is their duty to fight for their dignity. And that is the end. Thank you for listening. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Muito obrigado, Vinicius. Thank you. Shall we go? Perhaps we can go to Professor Almeida. I think you have to unmute.
Mauro,
I think you have to unmute. I don't know if I can. Let's see if I can unmute you.
Unmute?
Yeah, there you
go. Oh, okay. Now you got me. First of all, thank you very much for this invitation. It was a pleasure to read about the fieldwork experience of Vinicius. It's an area I am familiar with, as well with the Amazonian places. I start to comment, make some comments about the trade, the commercial aspects of the presentation, and then some comments about the political implications of the facts that Vinicius brings to our attention. The first point is that I had the impression, if I'm wrong, please correct me, Vinicius, that you are assuming that the older trade post system, it was a hierarchical system connecting scattered forest houses, riverine peasants dispersed around huge areas and along the rivers, connecting these household economies to, in a hierarchical way, to a central commercial house, and as opposed to the trade done by trade rivers, which was dispersed, non-centralized, and let's say more horizontal in its organization. I suggest that those two systems, the trade post system articulated to international and national markets, and the petty trade done by river traders, coexisted since the beginning of the rubber economy in Amazonia. And I based this suggestion in my experience in the Jura River and also in historical sources. So I don't see an opposition or succession between those two systems, the hierarchy of big trade houses and the itinerant river traders. And then this is important because I think that this duality is still active. My view is that those two systems attended to different functions. The old trade post systems operated by bosses was consisted into year advances of messages along periods of 1 year and even more. And these messages was of items of high cost, of low cost, sorry, and they were bulky and have weight. Things like salt, ammunition, cooking oil, and other instruments to work, like machetes and cooking material, tin cups for collecting the rubber, and so on and so forth. So both the itinerant traders, on the contrary, deal almost in cash. They deliver messages and collect payment, either cash or local products in short periods. And they deal with fragmentary messages, not with bulky things like ammunition, tool instruments, etc. At least in the past. Nowadays, this might have changed. So what I am suggesting is that those two functions are now active, but the big trade houses were replaced by institutions like ONG, like ISA, Instituto Socioambiental, Social Environment Institute, or by big business like Natura in the Middle Jura River, which collects oil from forest collectors and put this forest product into a world market. Natura has a monopoly and a monopsony in the area. So she's the only buyer and the only seller to local cooperatives in the Middle Jura River. And in the Terra do Meio, in the Xingu River, the ISA, Instituto Socioambiental, provides a similar service to the collectivity of ribeirinhos. They connect the local producers of rubber under price much above the market rates. They connect those supply of rubber to an enterprise to like Faber and Faber. So a German-based huge company. At certain times, government also took up this role. Is a historical point. Well, this is my first point: the complementarity of trade at two scales, and focus on different products and services. The other, yes, I have time. The other point is about the interesting discussion you make about rights and duties based on the usage of Amazonian peasants and riverine people, the usage of direito, Portuguese, translated by you as rights, with duties. they say the direito, the right of the rubber tapper is to deliver good rubber. This is his right. But look, the boss and the guys who are on the top, on the other side of the dyadic trade relationship, also has rights towards direitos in the local sense, towards the guy in the lower side of the transaction. So there is a system of reciprocal rights, between commas, which could be as reciprocal duties. So I'm not sure that that it's just a case of different ontologies of rights, but maybe a matter of language. And of the ambiguity involved in the notion of right in a commercial transactions. This ambiguity, for instance, you could bring up the fact that in English, you use law in a sense which translated in Portuguese as right. So there are schools of law in Brazil, there are scholars de direito. And direito, in this extended sense, cover the whole system of mutual obligations and duties of between people and between the state and people, between bosses and workers. It's interesting also to think that in the Brazilian tradition of law, science, or scholars de direito, Roman law has a very important role, and Roman law distinguishes two kinds of rights. These rights of the people over things, that's property on objects, against everybody else in the world, guaranteed by the state, by the police, etc. And it rights over people, and that's the right to have a service performed to you by someone. And this second right is just different from the first one because it involves a personal obligation, a personal duty of someone towards another person. This is an interesting point in this situation. Because you see, when you enter into a long-term, a year-long debt with someone else, this other guy, the lender, gains, he has a right projected in the future over what you are going to produce in order to pay your debts. But because of this, he has also a right over your person, because if you don't pay, you are subject to be forced, coerced to pay, and even potentially you could be arrested for that in some place or some countries. And also about this complicated issue of the meaning of rights and the difference between rights over things, rights over persons, duties and rights. It is the fact that in this modern society, many rational people, perfectly rational persons, enter by their own will, free will, into debt relations toward banks or toward enterprises by joining fidelity systems, which is a voluntary submission to a monopoly or to a monopsony, so the obligation to buy from someone at expenses, not buy for other guys, or the obligation, the commitment to sell only to a certain group or enterprise. So people are permanently in debt. And in fact, often, the personal value of an individual is measured by his debt. A guy who has a debt of billions certainly is worth more than a poor guy who is indebted by $50 and so on. And in my field experience in the rubber estates in Amazonia, this applied as well. The guys who had a high debt towards the trade post in the old times, they are also the most respected rubber tappers. They had more objects of value, like machines, motors, mattresses, cooking, and so on and so forth. And sometimes having property in towns, like houses, for instance. And the guys produced a lot, and they were also in debt by their own free will. So carrancismo was not the same as aviamento. I was personally involved in the movement of getting freedom from the trade posts in Juruá. That was the movement to create the first extractive reserve. But what happened after that is that many rubber tappers chose to continue their relations with the old bosses of the area, as opposed to, instead of joining the cooperative, the cantina system. I'm afraid I used already too much time. Is that right?
No,
10 minutes have gone. Huh?
No, please.
Okay. Let me try to add some final points.
Yeah, but take your time. This has been great.
So it's very hard to understand, right? For many people, including me, because the rubber tapper had capital, credit, equipment to replace the centralized structure of trade, but many of them choose to continue making business with the older bosses or patrons, patrons, in the sense of a patron-client relationships. So this kind of situation is the reason why I became interested in the functions performed by the old aviamento system, supply merchandise at long periods in a regime of high inflation rates through a remote and scattered population. The population is scattered through huge areas along rivers and in the forest, posing a very complicated problem for logistics and communication and management. So I now comment a little bit more about the other important point, which is the political implication of this discussion. I think that Vinicius is certainly right when he says that in his initial hypothesis that the freedom to trade with the river traders without persecution or competition or repression, which existed in the old times, the coexistence between the systems were never pacific, although there were situations of collaboration between the boss and the trader. The new system, the absence of coercion, did mean really the freedom in the sense of not fearing coercion, either by private thugs or by police to force rubber tappers to not to sell to river traders when they were indebted, but it was always challenged along according to records and according to my own personal experience. So it was a difference. It was in the sense that the people had now the possibility to choose between bosses, in a sense. So people are not forced to join the new cooperative in the Juruá River. They could choose between the older boss and the cooperative. And in the Xingu area, there is more, there is not, there is an Instituto Socioambiental and the network of cantinas of local trade posts is not the only game. There are all other channels, other guys who provide goods in the exchange or some sort of fidelity on the part of the residents. And anyway, even in the Middle Jura area where I mentioned the monopoly of Natura, this monopoly does not cover the whole area. There is dissidence with another channel run by the Association of Rubber Tappers and the extractivists, and a special case with a community who is independent from Natura and from the cooperative, and makes a kind of, runs a kind of trade based on cantinas with a heavy role of barter with strong community ties between the guys. So more close to a community kind of collective than to a commercial, the commercial structure of a business association, like a big cooperative. So there's some final points. It's about the Conselho Ribeirinho. I was personally involved in the beginning of this council, and also my students in the area, like the Ana de Francesco, who advised the emerging Conselho. In the Atlantic Forest, there is a similar initiative, the Conselho Caiçara, a council of fishermen living in the Atlantic forest, people who also produced a used plan based on traditional rules and adapted to new context, institutional context, much as the Conselho Ribeirinho in Altamira also produced their own use plan for management common resources. So it is, these are examples of initiatives to make more democratic decision-making process, to influence national policies, and also to connect people with markets, and trying to making this through a collective body, in this sense, is a step towards more democracy. This Conselho is very different from the deliberative councils who are part of the Brazilian environmental law. These deliberative councils are not bodies who represent the collectivity of forest dwellers, of people along rivers. They are a mix of people from the city, ONGs, officers from branches of government, maybe trade persons, influence in the area. They are, these representatives are not elected according to established rules. Sometimes they are just appointed by the chief of the station, of the area. And the local residents who make up 50% of these councils are not, do not represent our collective body. They are picked as individuals. Even if a guy is the president of a cooperative or association, he is not taking his part of these official councils, deliberative councils, in the quality of individuals. And this was a blow to the initial structure of the Reservas Extrativistas, which included the provision of co-management of the areas by deals between local associations, could be more than one, and government bodies to execute policies for education, health, and commerce, and so on. This possibility was explicitly ruled out by the environmental law started in 2000, the system of national units of conservation. So there is a battle for democratization in those areas, and Conselho Ribeirinhos is part of that. To finish, really, three things, 2 points. First is that trade relations at every level in those situations involve personal, reciprocal duties and claims. Rights over persons go together with rights over things, and they are a mix of face-to-face moral relationships and trade interested. Second, and this I think is also important, labor and work and consumption at the domestic and at the community level, as well as distribution of goods and merchandise, are activities that involve collective bodies from the family, from the neighborhood, to larger areas of friendship and connections, for instance, with relatives living in town. And finally, the management of common resources are also today a part collective activity, and part it's an activity under the state supervision. And this makes even more relevant the issue of the Conselho Riverine Councils, because they act as brokers, as middlemen between those local collectives and the state institutions. I'm sorry because I overused my time. But thank you very much again. It was a pleasure an honor to take part of this discussion.
Thank you. Nathalie?
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to hear Vinicius as well as Mauro. And I just want to start by introducing myself a little bit. Actually, I started my career as someone who left the business school in São Paulo, a very traditional business school, the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, to live in the São Gabriel da Cachoeira, in the northwest part of the Amazon, in the border with Colombia and Venezuela. And my role was precisely to try to intervene in the local trade system and try to work to help indigenous organizations to negotiate for better terms of trade. That was basically how I started my career. That was almost 20 years ago. And I was very young, by the way. I started doing that when I was 18 and then moved to São Gabriel when I was 20, 21. And I no longer work with this. I no longer live in the Amazon, unfortunately, but I do have fond memories. And of course, that experience shaped my views and my professional interests until today. So just a few reactions on what is being discussed already, and I will start by making a connection with my previous experience. First of all, when I got to São Gabriel da Cachoeira, when I got to the Rio Negro, the work that we were doing was basically to define like business plans with indigenous associations that wanted to engage in market related transactions. I mean, markets in Sao Paulo or even abroad. And we focused a lot on what they could supply. So we worked with very successful projects like the Artibaniwa, which was the first one to connect indigenous peoples to Tokstok, which is like the IKEA in Brazil. And today they sell a lot of different things. But two things that are very relevant from that experience that I think are also relevant to this conversation today. One was in relation to something that I think Mauro just said, or at least the way that I heard, which is that the local associations, in that case indigenous, but also in Iriri, they are riverine and somehow related. The relations are not only about they supplying goods. It's not about just like the forest products leaving the forest, right? But actually what are they accessing? What are the demands? What are the products that are going there, are going to the field? And something that I soon realized when I was in São Gabriel was that although all the initiatives that we were supporting, and I worked for ISA, I worked for Instituto Socioambiental for 7 years in that position, we were helping them to get better terms, and that meant better like fairer trade and better prices for their products, meaning that they were getting better income as well. But in the end of the day, the money that they got, which wasn't like super, well, for them was pretty significant. It wasn't like, if we could compare to like urban salaries or whatever, but that was channeled through the regatões, and that was channeled to the bosses. So in the end of the day, we were actually fueling that system that was politically actually not working in their favor. And I remember I was very young, as I said, and I was like, how do we deal with that? Because we're actually like just reinforcing the problem. Of course, there were other many benefits and co-benefits from trying to intervene and helping the associations, but that was a very important challenge that I don't think we have solved yet. And when I hear about the work in the Iriri, when I hear about the work in the Terra do Meio with the cantinas, I think it's part of this attempt to change not only the terms, but maybe the relations that are there. And then comes my second point. So in the Rio Negro, for those that are not familiar with, it's a very large area, 22 indigenous peoples, the size of Portugal. And and they are from different language groups and so on. But one of the group, and they are organizing in different river banks. So the whole Negro River is immense, but then you have 5 different like river banks. And in one of the river banks, there are these 2 people in the Chié River, the Huerequena, and Baré, and they are the guys that until today are extracting piaçava, which is very difficult work. It's a fiber, it's, anyhow, it's a very long story, but cutting it short, the trade of piaçava is still, until today, it's associated with, it's a sort of modern slavery thing. And one of the researchers that worked with them in the past is Márcio Meira, which is a Brazilian anthropologist. He became the president of FUNAI later on. And I think his work was quite influential. I remember reading it when I was in the field, because he described that in that case in Chié, and I don't know if that's something, I want to bring this because I sort of hear that when Vinicius was sharing his thoughts with us. But I remember that in Márcio's work, he says the following, that in the past, there was this very violent sort of relationship. And that transition or coexisted somehow, as Mauro said, with a more benevolent sort of mediation. So instead of having this violent, that case was not a rubber trader, but other sort of patrão, which was beating or even shooting people. There were several cases reported on that. It was a more peaceful relationship, but it's still like there was the very, very same economy of power that Vinicius described. So it was mediator, there was the inside, the outside, and people were providing goods for the outside and whatever, and someone would define what would come inside at very high prices and so on and so forth. Right.
Natalie.
Is the 90s, after the Constitution in the 1988, in the chapter, sorry, I don't know if someone interrupted, but anyway, after the Constitution enacted a chapter on indigenous rights, talking about rights in 1988, there was this explosion of associations in the Amazon, especially indigenous associations. And they kind of assumed the role of mediating trade, mediating the relationship of markets. And something that I think it's super important is how do we then see the role of these associations? Is this the same relationship that there was with the Aviamento, there was with the other bosses? Is this just a change of bosses? And I think Mauro said that people can choose among bosses, right? But are they doing the same type of work? I think that's a relevant question. In my point of view, many times I saw that if terms were different, the relationships were not. And I was stricken one day when I heard like people talking about the association for Chié, for instance, as the boss, as the patrão. To what extent they were just reproducing the same unfair relations, I don't know. And I think that's quite important because as we were hearing this today, I was thinking to what extent there is space for maneuvering to disestablishing this system, which is ongoing and ongoing, and really try to establish new relations and not only new terms. And then I don't have an answer to that, Vinicius. I think that's up for discussion. But then moving more to the tragedy of the commons discussion on on the relevance of the Amazon today and how these many alliances are being constituted with the outside, to say so. I really appreciated that you included in your talk the word amansar. I think that's a very, very precious one. And it's one that some time ago in the 2000s, I remember vividly, Brazil had Fernando Henrique Cardoso, which was our president around 2000s. he had this program called Avança Brasil. It was literally to advance infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember that there was a call, there was a manifesto by people that were involved in the rights-based movements, such as those involved in Acre with the Seringueiros themselves, and then other organizations. They called for a Amansa Brasil. So instead of advancing, amansando, which is literally taming. It's try to tame this thing on having to leave nature, having to leave, for instance, the Amazon or the Mata Atlântica or the Cerrado behind in order to enter history. I think it's so important to kind of just recall that, because if we look into what's going on today and on all the discussions and the stature of the Amazon in the global debate, even in the US presidential debate, right? I think it's quite ironic that suddenly the Amazon is kind of our passport to history. That's what's being called upon us. And it's not clear to me how these big alliances, they connect to this more micro but so relevant relationships and alliances that are being established on the ground. I don't see any like super strong connection today. There's opposition to Belo Monte, there's opposition to deforestation, but in the end of the day, I think it's still unclear, or it's still to be illuminated what's going on at the very micro level, as in the case that you were just mentioning to us. What does the rest of the world has to learn about the relations that are there now, the trade there is there, but also the demands and the needs. I think it's to be seen. And last but not least, I think I will stop here. I think it's, yeah, I think it's, no, maybe I will say this. There's something that I learned when I was in Rio Negro was that this pursuit of freedom had its own interpretations. So just a final short storytelling. When there was this very violent sort of relationship established by the patrões and so on, so long time ago, violent, I mean physical violence. At some point, I think around the 30s or 40s, there was in that region, there was a liberator. So there was a lady, an American missionary called Sophie Miller. She went to that region, and she gained a lot of power, and she was able to, establish even like new, not established, but she gathered a lot of other members for her mission, her religious mission. But because she freed a lot of people and communities from unfair trade relationships, and she has done that through education. So she was moving around and literally literating people. So putting the Bible in the indigenous languages, and then literating the indigenous peoples in their own languages by using the Bible. I know that's a very different story, but I just wanted to bring this here because I think that's just an example that is worth like perhaps discussing on the pursuit of freedom from difficult trade relationships throughout time. Although you said, Vinicius, that you thought that's your own interpretation, and you saw that in the case of the person, Joel, that you spoke about, that wasn't his interpretation. I think there are other examples throughout history that were collected and that had that point of view of, how do we free people from these unfair systems and and there were benefits. I think from time to time, it's not just like win and lose relationships. There are some trade-offs and of course some benefits as well. So this is it. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the risk of bringing someone like myself, which is not an anthropologist. So I know I might have, um, done a lot of conceptual mistakes here, but I'm just a practitioner, and it's lovely to be here with you today.
Well, the perspective of a non-anthropologist too, this has been really excellent. Thank you all. I think that there's a lot of big questions have been pried open in the discussants' comments. So I'll send it back to you, Vinicius. Take your time. You'll have the last word. Our time is nearly up. We have about 7 or 8 minutes. So, react as you wish to all of the really insightful comments by both Mauro and Natalia. And I do think we'll need a follow-up on a lot of these issues at some point.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both, Mauro and Natalie, for the commentary. They are a lot to think about. And I think, as Bruno mentioned, I'll just try to scratch at some of my most immediate reactions to it. So beginning with some of what Mauro has offered about the difference in the trading systems. I agree that there are two systems historically, just like you described, that operate in different volume and time scales. I think that my initial approach, or in the beginning, I couldn't see that, and it took me a while, and to talk that process of talking with elders alongside with seeing how the present system is structured was what allowed me to see that it was that even though it used to be operated in this hierarchical form, there was still some sort of value system behind both of them that allowed them to work together despite the tensions. And that what has happened since the rubber barons left and the trade house system disappeared for a while was that the itinerant traders, the regatões, assumed some of those responsibilities, like the bulky merchandise and offering credit that would last for a year, was assumed by especially the river traders that had enough capital to do that. So in a way, they became less of like they synthesized both trading systems into one person. From what I could learn from and observe from my personal experience. And now we have this new trade house system that's being supported by cooperatives and NGOs, and that we might be seeing something that will resemble something closer to what existed before, but it's still kind of early to tell. But I think that it took me a little bit of time to understand how these could be separate at times and then converge at others and still share some fundamental values, like Professor Mauro mentioned, that it is a moral system, a system in rights, in people, and in objects, and etc. So, which comes to the second part of your comments that touch upon issues of reciprocity and the notion of law as also one of the aspects of direito, the way that we use it, the way that the word is used in the Amazon. And and that this recent, say, turn to collective bodies that can somehow bring all of this, these different aspects of it into translate from these dyadic relationships of that used to be based on trade into a different format that has more readily translatable political vocabulary to be used within a democratic arena, to be put forward to government institutions and all of that. I see that as being what is most interesting at the moment, or that's how I understand some of the things that I try to bring about the Conselho Ribeirinho, and how it's using this moment as a situation, a tragic situation that, however, tries to create and extend some forms of relationships that have existed before. So, and as for Nathalie's comment, I was really, I hadn't realized what you mentioned about the Amansa Brasil. I thought that was pretty brilliant. It was, and I definitely want to look back into that and see what was going on. It's really fantastic how the usage of the word. And and I think that you brought from your experience in the Rio Negro a lot of really interesting aspects of what is going on in these relationships of supply. And I think that one of the things that you showed to us is that these relationships are not so immediately available for being changed, say, from the outside. Like, I think that that's a point in common between your comments and Mauro, that although the political scenario changes, the way that the relations are structured in these places, there are continuities. People who continue to want to be indebted, people who continue to want to deal with the regatões, and this you know, NGOs coming in or not, are they just the new patrões? This is really, I think that's at the crux of it all. And I feel that going back to because I don't have an answer as well. That's another point, right? So going back to how to transform or the forms that this is taking in collective bodies that are bringing these responsibilities into a new sort of institution is probably, I think, where the answer is, and how, so that we can understand what new forms these responsibilities will take. And I think I'm out of time, so I'll leave it here, but really hoping that we can continue this conversation.
Oh, maravilha. Again, thank you so much. First, a round of applause to all of you. Thank you so much, Vinicius, Nathalie, Mauro. Hopefully to be continued, and thank you all who have been listening in. Again, this will be available on YouTube very soon.